Okay, colleagues, hello and welcome back. Now, today, another short video on an interesting topic. What is good? How do we define this word? Again, as usual, I think you can see a certain pattern here. I will refer to first-year students again. So when I see first-year students in September, and we begin discussing philosophical issues, whenever we discuss virtue or goodness or justice, or maybe even excellence, I think many, if not most students, have this assumption that there's a certain natural, so to speak, objective definition of what is good, and by extension of what is wrong, what is bad, what is evil. And this is both an interesting and a problematic question in all sorts of ways. Because, of course, one of the challenges of doing philosophy is confronting the issue of relativism. So, relativism, broadly speaking, is a view that morality is not objective, but is relative to a given person or a given culture. Now, sometimes scholars will distinguish between types of relativism. For example, George Klosko, in his History of Political Theory, talks about factual relativism and moral relativism. So, factual relativism simply refers to the fact, an observed fact, that, again, as a matter of fact, cultures do differ in their definitions of what is good. You know, cultures among each other, and also the same culture at different times. Herodotus tells this very nice story about two tribes at the court of the Persian king. One of them is Greeks, and the other a certain Indian tribe. Now, Greeks burn their dead, and this Indian tribe actually consumes, eats the flesh of their deceased. And when the Persian king informs the Greeks and the Indians, respectively, of the customs of the other, both tribes are equally horrified. So Greeks are horrified at the prospect of eating their dead, and the Indian tribe is horrified at the prospect of burning their dead. And Herodotus sums up the story by quoting the poet Pindar, saying that nomos is king. That is to say, that the customs of a particular given society are seen by that society to be natural, inviolable, the best. So, factual relativism merely states that there are differences in the definition of right and wrong, good or evil. But one could also occupy a stronger position and be what Klosko refers to as moral relativism, or I could say strong moral relativism, and assert that not only do cultures differ, but also there is no fact of the matter. So not only do people disagree, but there is no possibility of agreement. To loosely quote Thomas Hobbes, "Whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire is that which he, for his part, calls good, and the object of his hate and aversion is what he calls evil, there being nothing simply and absolutely so." So I hope this point is clear enough, that even though it may seem that, of course, we can agree that certain things are simply wrong and certain things are clearly right, nevertheless, it is often not too hard to find historical examples of particular cultures or particular individuals who would wholeheartedly approve of more or less any allegedly evil action in question, and likewise, circumstances under which they would condemn actions that seem naturally good, noble, or just. Now, let me also parenthetically mention that I think that discussing relativism is both absolutely necessary if we want to do philosophy seriously, and also is fairly dangerous. So, on the one hand, I feel that it is necessary to confront first-year students with the problem of relativism, but at the same time, I do recognize the inherent danger in doing that. This points to something of an antisocial element that is essential to doing philosophy as such. This perennial accusation of philosophers as essentially impious or impious. a certain tension between philosophical virtue and political virtue, if you want. A cosmopolitan philosopher who wants to take a step back from the particular rules of one's society and ask a question about the status of those rules. And on the other hand, the demand of political virtue, the demand of patriotic virtue, of being loyal to the customs and traditions of one's society. I think a very real tension, and therefore a very real challenge. Let me also mention in passing that I think I am noticing a certain difference between the two major departments in which I teach philosophy. Economists, for whichever reason, tend to assume that there is a universal objective standard of goodness. Not everyone, but I think there's a tendency. Whereas students of international relations, I think, are much more attuned to the problems of relativism and, in general, this framework of realism in international relations theory. Especially if we look at international politics, the politics of bodies such as United Nations, I think it seems quite obvious that, at least as a matter of fact, at least right now in 2020, there is no substantial ground for a moral consensus. Like, you lock two people in the same room and they disagree about what is essentially good, even if both are perfectly convinced that there is such a thing as objective goodness. It's just that they think that they are objectively good and the other side is, let's say, objectively evil. Again, an important reminder that the degree of one's conviction, the sincerity and the fervor of one's conviction, is probably a very bad guide to the actual morality of this conviction, if I can put it that way. Now, this is actually a very complicated topic, and I want to try to keep this video short. So I mostly want to focus on the negative side, so to speak. So what I hope to have accomplished through this video is to alert your attention to the fact that moral consensus is problematic, and there are no simple, straightforward, knockdown ways of defining what is good and what is evil. And people do, as a matter of fact, disagree. So I'm actually leaving out a lot out of this video. I could, for example, talk about the nuances of the disagreement, of how, again, the very same action can be seen by two different people, or sometimes by the same person at different points in time. So again, the very same action seen through one perspective as evil and through another as good or right or just or proper. Another obvious huge issue which I'm leaving out are all the various ways to work through, so to speak, to resolve this issue one way or another. One obvious way would be, let's say, some form of moral nihilism, saying that, in fact, all morality is human invention, and we do disagree and will always disagree, precisely because there is no fact of the matter. Another way would be through some form of social contract argument, which would try to identify certain common features of human nature, common to all or most human beings, that would allow a certain form of emergent consensus on the national or maybe the international level. And there are many others, but I have to leave all these discussions as a topic for another day. I am reminded of Bertrand Russell's dictum, "It is good to stock the mind with paradoxes." So I hope that you have found this quote-unquote paradox with a question mark stimulating, and I hope to see you next time. And until then, take care.